Hi there, it's me Finn, and tonight we're going to talk about something you may have never wondered, but once you hear it, you just can't stop imagining it. You've heard stories about knights, lords, castles, and battles, sure, but what about the people who lived outside those walls? What about the everyday folks, the ones who worked the fields, raised the animals, gathered herbs, and, somehow managed to make a dinner every night, without a kitchen like yours, or even anything close? Most people imagine something like a chicken leg and bread. But what if I told you dinner was a lot more complicated, and sometimes strangely creative? So tonight, let's go back, not to the throne rooms, not to the battlefields, but to the small smoky huts where real life happened. Let's start by subscribing, and now let's step inside the life of a medieval peasant through their food. It's late afternoon in a small English village, around the year 1282. The sky is grey, as usual. The sun doesn't really shine, it sort of glows behind the clouds. You can hear geese in the distance, and there's this low thumping sound, a wooden bucket knocking against a well wall. That's Thomas, he's 10, and he's drawing water for his mother. The house he walks into is not much more than a wooden frame with mud and straw packed between the beams. The roof, thatch, leaky in winter, smoky all year. The floor, it's just dirt, not even flat. A little damp in places, a few rushes tossed about to keep things dry. But no real chairs, and definitely no table, like the one you're imagining. Now, the family has 6 people, mother, father, 2 sons, and 2 daughters. They're not starving, but they're not, full either. They eat to stay alive, not to enjoy it. But here's the strange part, they do enjoy it, just not in the way we do. A hot bowl of something, anything, after 12 hours in the field, can taste like heaven. Today is not a feast day, no holiday, so dinner will be whatever they can make with what they have. Let's look around. There's a small fire burning low in the center of the room. It's always burning, mostly smoke, not flame. There's no chimney, so the smoke just kind of fills the air, drifts upward, escapes through the roof slowly. Sometimes it works, sometimes not. The whole room smells like wet wool, ashes, and old onions. What's for dinner? Mother takes a large clay pot, sits by the fire, and drops in a few chunks of something grey and soft. It's turnip. Not fresh, not sweet, but still edible. She adds a little barley, soaked since morning. Not much, just enough. Then, she reaches for the good stuff. A small bundle of dried herbs, marjoram, maybe, or nettle, or something else she found in the woods. A pinch, no salt. Salt is too expensive. Now here's something odd. Most people think peasants just ate bread and ale. But, the bread wasn't like yours. It was coarse, rough, chewy, and made with whatever grain was cheapest that year. Sometimes barley, rye, even peas or beans, ground into flour. That's what the children are doing now. They're flattening the dough, not into a loaf, but into flat cakes. Easier to cook, faster. They don't have an oven. They'll bake it on hot stones near the fire. Carefully, too much ash, and the bread tastes like smoke. Too little heat, and it stays wet inside. Father comes in, mud on his boots, tired, face covered in the day's dust. He looks at the pot, doesn't ask questions, just sits down. This is dinner. It doesn't change. But sometimes, on lucky days, there's meat. Tonight, there is a bit of bacon, just a strip, hung in the rafters for weeks, covered in salt and ash, hard as wood. But it gives flavor. Mother shaves off a bit, tosses it into the pot. The whole room smells better, almost instantly. Now here's the thing. People today would think this is poor food, but peasants knew how to make the most of what they had. They stretched flavor. They reused everything. Even yesterday's broth gets thickened with bread crusts, or a bit of mashed root, turned into something new. And guess what else they did? They talked. Dinner was quiet, but not silent. Soft voices, maybe a little gossip, a story, sometimes a song. The youngest child says something funny. The others laugh, not loudly, just a gentle sound, the kind that makes the fire feel warmer. No candles here, just firelight. Shadows dance on the walls. It feels like the room is alive, not with things, but with people, breathing, eating, surviving. There's a bowl passed around, wooden. Each person takes a scoop, eats with their hands, or with a spoon carved from horn or wood. Forks? No, not yet. Spoons were enough. Fingers were faster. As they eat, Mother says tomorrow she'll gather mushrooms. She knows the safe ones. Not everyone does. And she might find some wild garlic. If so, she'll dry it, use it through winter, because food is not just for now. It has to stretch, to last. That's why they also eat beans. Dried, soaked for hours, then added to stew. Slow food. simple food, reliable food. You won't believe this, but sometimes dinner would include things we'd never touch today. Hedgehogs, frogs, even snails. Not often, but when they had nothing else, these small creatures became meals. But tonight, it's just soup, bread, and the taste of that one strip of bacon, shared by 6. Now it's getting darker. The fire is low. One of the older boys adds more wood. Carefully, wood is valuable, collected from the forest, but not too much. The Lord owns the trees. They only take what's fallen. If they cut a living branch, it could mean punishment. Everyone has finished eating. There's no dessert. That's not a thing. But maybe someone saved an apple from earlier, or there's a little honey left, if the bees were kind this year. But mostly, dinner ends when the bowl is empty. And now, here's something strange. The leftover crumbs, they're gathered, fed to the chickens, or to the dog, or saved. Nothing is wasted, not even scraps, because the difference between hunger and comfort could be just one spoonful. Outside, the sky is almost black. The geese have stopped calling. The night is quiet. No carts, no bells, just the sound of wind in the trees, and maybe a low moo from the barn. The family lays down, together, on straw mattresses. One for parents, one for kids. No blankets like yours, just old cloaks, maybe a fur if they're lucky. They sleep close, for warmth, for comfort, for safety, and in the soft dark of their little world, someone whispers, "What do we eat tomorrow?" And nobody answers, not because they don't know, but because, in their world, food is not just food. It's time, it's care, it's survival. And for tonight, dinner was enough. And with that thought, the fire flickers once more and settles to a glow. Let's stay here a little longer, in this warm, smoky room, with its wooden walls and soft voices. Let the sound of barley stew, bubbling gently, soothe your mind. Let the smell of ash and herb wrap around your thoughts like a blanket. Let the rhythm of simple life, of shared food, and quiet nights carry you into dreams. Tomorrow, we'll wake with the sun, we'll gather mushrooms, bake more bread, and cook something new, with the same old fire, but not just yet, not while it's this peaceful, this still, the silence. The night passes slowly, softly, as the fire sinks into just warm ash. The sky outside turns from black to a deep grey, and then, before anyone even opens their eyes, a rooster calls, not loudly, more like a lazy stretch than a shout. It's still cold. The morning air sneaks through the cracks in the walls. You can almost feel it brushing across your skin. The first to rise is always Mother. She wraps her wool cloak tighter, pushes back the rushes on the floor with her bare foot, and stirs what's left in the fire pit. Ah, a few orange embers are still glowing. That's good, that's luck. No need to start it all over again. She adds a few twigs, blows gently, and a small flame returns, like a secret waking up. There's not much food left from last night, but today is a work day, and people need to eat something. Something small, just to start. The bread from yesterday is now hard, not spoiled, just stiff. But no one throws it away. Mother dips it in warm water, maybe goat milk if there's any left. It softens. She slices a small onion. Raw, sharp, but it will wake them up. By now the others begin to rise, slowly, quietly. Scratched at their skin, smelled of sheep, but it's warm, and warmth matters more than comfort. They eat in silence, bread dipped in the warm milk, bits of onion, maybe a piece of old cheese if the rats haven't found it. The youngest daughter, she has a habit of licking her fingers after every bite. It's cute, but no one says anything. Not because they're cold, just because words in the morning feel heavy. Soon, the older children are sent out. There's a stream nearby, and Mother wants wild cress. She knows the spots where it grows. Dark green, peppery, fresh. It makes plain things taste alive. Father leaves to help with sheep. He doesn't own them, they belong to the Lord, but tending them means he gets to keep some wool, and sometimes a small piece of meat if one dies. While they're gone, Mother begins to plan tonight's dinner. Let's pause here a moment and think about that. Because unlike today, where meals are decided in minutes, maybe ordered by phone, for a peasant woman, dinner is a day-long thought, a gentle, constant, moving idea. What do I have? What might I find? What do I need to stretch? What do I need to save? She walks to the corner of the hut, lifts a wooden lid, and peers into a small box lined with straw. There's an egg. Just one. The chicken laid it early. That's a good sign. She wraps it gently in cloth. Maybe she'll boil it for father. He needs strength. She also checks the hanging herbs. Some are dry, others moldy. She sorts them, picking off bad leaves. A tiny handful of dried leeks, a bundle of thyme, a few wild mint leaves. These things, they may look small, but they are dinner's soul. Now, the neighbor's boy comes over. He's holding something in a folded cloth. He says it quietly, almost shy. Mother said to share. Inside are 2 small parsnips. Pale, wrinkled, but still fresh enough. His mother had too many, and in return, maybe he'll get a heel of bread tonight. Food was shared, often, not just out of kindness, but out of survival. If your neighbor has nothing today, and you help them, they'll remember tomorrow when you have nothing. It's not charity, it's balance. Let's walk with the children now, through the fields. The stream is cool and shallow, full of stones and frogs. They kneel carefully, brushing aside weeds, looking for wild cress and chickweed. They taste leaves as they go. A bite here, a nibble there, not to eat, just to know if it's good. That's how they learn. By mouth, by watching, by listening. One of them finds something strange. A patch of bright yellow mushrooms. They all freeze, because mushrooms, they can be food, or they can be danger. But they've been taught. These ones, safe, dry spongy tops, growing on old elm roots. They pluck a few, careful not to crush them. As they walk back, they carry their bundles in woven cloth, damp with morning air, smelling of earth and leaf. Back at the hut, Mother is boiling water in the big pot again. She adds barley, a pinch of herbs, and those wrinkled parsnips. The egg, she places gently in another pot. It's not cracked. That's lucky. Now, you might wonder, why all this effort for something so simple? But it's not simple, not to them. This is survival. This is comfort. This is the difference between going to sleep calm or going to sleep hungry. The door opens. Father is back. He's carrying, oh, a surprise. A hare, caught in a snare. Not much meat, but enough. Tonight's stew just became richer. He hangs it from the beam. Not much blood left. He'll skin it later. The bones will go into the pot, maybe for days. Flavor doesn't come from meat, it comes from patience. The oldest daughter, she has an idea. She takes some of the flour, mixes it with a little ale, not to drink, but to make small dumplings. She learned it from the priest's cook. Mix, knead, shape, drop. They'll puff a little in the stew. Soft, soothing, and now, let's go outside for a moment. The sun is still hidden, but the air smells sweeter now. The wind brings the scent of hay, and the nearby hearths. All across the village, small fires cook small meals, all different, but also the same. Bread, soup, stew, and the scent of something burning slightly, always something burning. Children run with sticks, dogs bark lazily, and somewhere, a bell rings. Midday, time to turn the pot. The stew is bubbling, the hare's bones are in, the mushrooms too. The dumplings float on top like little clouds. Steam rises, smells like comfort, like a promise that everything will be okay. And now, they wait. There's no rushing stew. It takes hours, so they sit, they talk. The girls spin wool, the boys carve sticks, father mends a boot. Quiet work, hands moving, thoughts drifting, and the stew, it keeps simmering, patiently, like the world outside the hut doesn't matter. Just this pot, this room, these people. Soon, it's evening again. The sky dims, smoke trails rise from the rooftops, dogs curl in corners, chickens settle on their perch, and inside, the stew is done. Mother ladles it carefully, one scoop each. The broth is thin, but it clings to the bread. The dumplings are soft. The meat, not much, but enough to chew. No one talks much while eating, just the sounds of sipping and small sighs. Afterward, the pot is rinsed, not scrubbed, just rinsed. Ash and hot water do the job. They sit by the fire again. It's quiet, but it's not empty. It's full of something ancient, something warm, and as the last of the stew settles in their stomachs, and the last flame dances in the hearth, a little voice says, "Tomorrow, can we have porridge?" And someone chuckles softly, "If we've got oats." No one worries, not too much, because today, they ate, and tomorrow, well, tomorrow will come, and they'll find something. They always do. That night, the wind outside was restless. It didn't howl, no, but it whispered, dragging itself across the thatched roof like it was trying to remember something. The family didn't speak much. The stew from earlier had left everyone warm, but sleepy. The youngest curled up with a scrap of wool, eyes fluttering. A spark popped from the hearth. No one flinched. It was part of the lullaby now, a part of the silence. A quiet night in a world of rough wool, worn wood, and slow warmth. And then, morning again, slowly, as if time didn't want to move forward but had no choice. This morning, there was no egg. Chickens don't lay every day, after all, especially not in the cold seasons. That's fine. They had something else. Ah yes, the oats. They found them tucked away in a tied sack near the grain barrel. Just enough for porridge. Not too thick, not too thin, but enough to fill. Porridge. It wasn't sweet. Not like we know it today. There was no sugar. Sometimes, if they were lucky, honey. But today, nope. Just oats, water, a pinch of salt, and patience. That's the flavor of the morning. Mother stirred slowly, careful not to let the bottom burn. Stirring was half the work. You had to keep it from clumping. Sometimes, she hummed as she stirred. A song with no words, just shapes of sound from her mother and grandmother before her. The children, they rubbed their eyes, yawned without shame, and wrapped themselves in their cloaks before moving closer to the pot. They didn't ask if it was ready. They could smell it, and that was enough. Now, while the porridge bubbled, let's look at something else, something not often mentioned. The tools. You see, cooking tools for peasants weren't grand or polished. Most were made by hand, or handed down for generations. A single iron pot, a wooden ladle, a flat stone for crushing herbs, a dull knife, used carefully, almost respectfully. Tools weren't just things, they were part of the rhythm. And that pot, it had stories. It had seen barley stews, wild onion broths, sour cabbage, split pea mush, and even burnt beans that everyone pretended not to notice. It had scars from the flame, stains from the years, and a certain shine where it had been scrubbed so often. That morning it gave them porridge. Steam curled from its lip, slow and white, like a quiet dance. They didn't use bowls like we imagine. Instead, thick wooden cups, shared sometimes, or hollowed-out trenchers, stale bread turned into edible plates. But today, they used their cups. The porridge filled them halfway, just enough to warm their hands. No spoons. They had a few, whittled from ash wood. Not perfect, slightly uneven, but they worked. You held them gently, not tightly, or they'd split. And if you were the youngest, you sometimes just used your fingers, quietly, carefully, because food wasn't messy, it was precious. Now, as the morning went on, they began their daily chores. But something was different today. Today was baking day. Not every day, but maybe once a week. If there was enough flour, and the weather was dry, and if the communal oven wasn't broken. That's right. They didn't all have ovens in their huts. Too expensive, too dangerous. Instead, there was a village oven, stone, wide, shared. Mother packed the dough early. She'd let it rest overnight, tucked near the fire. It had risen gently, not with yeast like today, but with wild starters, the kind you had to feed like a pet. Flour, water, and time. That's how it grew. She dusted it with oat husks, cut it into lumps, wrapped them in cloth. Then she stepped outside. The path to the oven was muddy, always muddy, and her boots sank with every step. But she knew the way. She always had. The oven, already smoking. A few other women stood nearby, bread tucked in their arms, wrapped in cloths and hope. They chatted softly, exchanged herbs, gossiped in whispers. Not to be cruel, but because words needed space to stretch after a quiet week. Mother placed her dough inside when it was her turn. The heat hit her face like a wall. The smell, it was everything. Warm, yeasty, a little sharp from the stone walls. While it baked, she waited, sometimes sitting on a stump, sometimes checking the village board, a wooden post with notices carved or tied to it. Most of it she couldn't read, but the drawings helped. A lost goat, a festival coming, a birth, a death. Life continued in charcoal scratches. Back home, the children cleaned, swept rushes into a pile, shook the woolen cloaks, gathered the dried herbs that had fallen. They weren't told to, they just knew. That's what time and pattern teach you. Father worked at the edge of the village, cutting thatch, his hands wrapped in old cloth, rough from work. He didn't mind. Work was its own kind of prayer. It kept the body busy, the mind quiet. Now when Mother returned, the bread was still warm, not soft though. Peasant bread was dense, hearty, made to last, cracked on the outside, chewy inside. But when she broke it open, steam still rose. She smiled. That was dinner, but she didn't serve it yet. She set it aside, let it cool. Bread was good, but it needed company. So she made something called pottage. Again. Yep, always pottage, but never quite the same twice. This time, it was made with split peas. They had a few left. She soaked them since morning, stirred them into the pot, added wild greens, a cracked onion, a few leaves of sorrel, and, a little leftover broth from yesterday's stew. Nothing wasted, ever. She let it simmer as the sun dipped lower, the pot bubbling gently, a sound like comfort. Now, this is where things get quiet again. The family gathers, they sit, they eat, pottage and bread, and no one complains, because this is food. This is love made visible, quiet, warm, slow, true. And then, Father brings out a secret, from his coat. A small pouch. Inside, a handful of hazelnuts, found in the woods, shelled by hand. The children's eyes light up. He drops them one by one, into little palms. They crack them gently, nibbling the sweet meat inside. A gift, a treasure, a tiny dessert. And suddenly, the meal feels full of more than just food. Full of moments, of silence, of breathing, of warmth. Afterward, they gather herbs by the fire, dried mint, chamomile, fennel. Mother brews a small pot of tea. Not real tea, no, but close enough. Leaves steeped in hot water, a touch of honey, just a drop. They sip, and the room fills with the scent of mint and smoke. That night, they sleep early, not because they're tired, but because that's what the dark asks for. And the fire fades, and the wind, stops whispering, and all that's left is a hut, filled with bellies not empty, and dreams, gentle as smoke. Outside, the moon hides, the stars blink, and time, the slow, soft time of peasant life, marches on without sound. The next morning arrived, not loudly, no, but like a whisper through the cracks of the wooden walls. A faint golden light gently touched the floor, dancing across the straw and dust, without asking for permission. The fire had burned low in the night, leaving only orange coals nestled in ash. They looked like sleepy eyes, blinking slowly beneath the grey. Mother stirred first. She always did. Not because she had to, but because the world seemed to wait for her to rise before it remembered to begin. Her steps were slow at first, the kind that made no sound. She picked up a stick from the hearth pile, nudged the embers, and blew softly, like she was waking a baby bird. The fire caught. The day had begun. Today wasn't like yesterday. Today, they were preparing for a visit. A neighbor, old Merrick, the thatcher with a limp, who traded moss and dry straw for whatever people could spare. A bowl of broth, a piece of cloth, sometimes only conversation. So, something had to be made. Something different, not fancy. No, that wasn't the peasant way. But something warm, something that filled the hut with smell. Today would be leek and barley stew. Barley. It was the grain of the people, not like wheat, which went to the lords and the monks. Barley was coarser, tougher, slower to soften, but when it did, it turned into something creamy, thick, and rich, like eating time itself. Mother poured the barley into a wooden bowl, picked out the tiny black stones with the tip of a knife, one by one. It took patience, a kind of quiet love. The children watched her fingers move, and then, when she left the bowl alone, the eldest took over, without a word. Outside, father was sharpening the sickle. It sang in short, sharp hums as he dragged it against a flat stone. There were more greens to cut from the wild slope beyond the edge of the village. Dandelion, sorrel, wild garlic if they were lucky. The village dogs barked distantly, not in warning, just to remind everyone they were still there. Meanwhile, the water pot began to warm. Barley went in first. No salt yet. Salt was precious. Then the leeks, long, green, cleaned in the small stream behind the hut. They sliced them carefully, letting the white rings fall into the pot like soft little wheels. A few scraps of root vegetable followed. Leftovers, mostly. A bit of turnip, one soft carrot. The peel was bitter, but the middle was sweet. The scent began to fill the hut slowly. And something strange happened. People started to hum, just little tunes, without melody, just sounds of comfort. The kind of hum that matches the bubbling of a stew. Old Merrick arrived around noon, walking with his crooked cane made from twisted birch. His beard was yellow-grey, and his smile held more story than teeth. He carried moss, fresh, dry, perfect for patching roofs or stuffing shoes. He didn't knock, no one did. He just leaned on the doorframe and said, "Smells like summer in here." They all laughed. He was given a place by the fire, a chunk of bread, and a bowl of barley and leek stew, still steaming. He blew gently before every bite, squinting into the spoon like it might talk back. "This," he said between mouthfuls, "tastes like the forest remembered us." Mother smiled. The children listened. Merrick always brought stories with him, about old winters, and fields that once glowed gold, and a fox that learned to bark like a dog to steal eggs. Some of the stories were true, some were not. That didn't matter, because the food and the story, well, they belonged together, like spoon and bowl, like fire and night. After he left, the pot still held enough for a second helping. Barely. The family waited. No one took more until the youngest had first pick. That was the way. Later that evening, they began preparing for something even simpler, the drying of herbs. Yes, food wasn't always about meals. It was about storing, keeping, preparing for days that might come harder than today. They had bundles of wild thyme, mugwort, dried apple slices, even rose hips from last fall, tied with twine and hung from beams. The air began to carry not just the scent of stew, but the soft perfume of sun and plant. They used nettles too, carefully, dried and later crushed into soup, full of iron, strong, and mint, for tea, or to rub into linen to keep moths away. This part of peasant life was quiet, almost sacred. They didn't speak much while hanging herbs. They moved slowly, and every now and then, one of the children would hold a bundle close and breathe in. They didn't know the names of every herb, but they knew what each did, which soothed a cough, which helped sleep, which made stew taste like spring. Now, the sun began to fall. Its light touched the tops of trees, making the leaves look like they were lit from within. Birds called once or twice, then stopped. The chickens settled in their coop, and inside, the family began to make the evening meal. Tonight, just leftovers. But leftovers were never just leftovers. The stew had thickened, the bread had dried slightly, but everything still held flavor. Sometimes, they added a splash of ale, not strong ale, peasant ale, weak, brewed in buckets, safer than water sometimes, because water could carry sickness, but the brewing boiled it all away. Children drank it too. No one thought twice. A splash of that ale into the stew made it richer, warmer, and for a moment, no one spoke again. They just listened, to the pot, to the wind, to the world. Dinner ended with a small bit of something special. Berries, dried, from last season. Only a few. They were tart, tiny, but they made the children smile. You see, sweetness was rare, not just in food, but in time. Sweetness had to be held in the mouth for as long as it could last, and as they licked their fingers, Mother reached for something wrapped in cloth. Cheese. Not much, but enough for a taste. Soft, white, sharp from age, made from the goat's milk collected last week. She cut it into slivers, thin like ribbons. Everyone got a piece. There's something about cheese after stew, something that tells the tongue, you've done enough today, you can rest now. And they did. They sat by the fire, full without being stuffed, quiet without being silent, warm without needing more wood. and slowly, without anyone deciding it, they began to sleep. First the youngest, then the middle child, then father, head back, mouth open, soft snore like wind in tall grass. Mother stayed awake a little longer. She watched the fire. She always did. Outside the wind returned, but it didn't speak of storms, only stories. Stories of barley and bread, and the quiet life that few remember, but once lived in every breath of every field. And so, the night returned. Not dark, just deep, like the inside of a well filled with dreams. The morning began again as softly as breath, not with loud roosters or church bells, but with the steady creaking of wood as the hut shifted its bones against the cool air. The sky outside was still shy, painted in pale blues and sleepy clouds that looked like they hadn't decided what shape to become yet. Inside the hut, the coals still lived, barely. Mother knelt quietly, her hands warmed by the faint heat as she stirred them gently to life. The air smelled like yesterday's fire, and something else. It was bread day, not the fancy kind from a noble's table. No, this was the bread of peasants, earthy, dense, made with what the land gave, and sometimes what it forgot to give. They called it maslin bread. It was strange, really. Not one grain but two, wheat and rye, mixed together, because neither was enough on its own. The dough had been started the night before, a soft wet sponge of flour, water, and the soul of last week's bread. That's what they called it, the mother. The bit of dough kept hidden in a cloth, just enough yeast to wake the new batch into life. This morning, it had bubbled, not loudly, but enough. Enough to say, I'm ready. They added more flour, not much, and salt, just a pinch, because salt was a treasure. Then they kneaded, slowly, together. Even the smallest hands pressed and turned the dough. It was work, but it was also like singing with your arms, soft, repetitive, calming. While the dough rested beneath a cloth, they began the second task of the morning, pottage. Not dinner yet, just something to carry them through the day. A thin, brothy dish, almost a soup, but filled with scraps. Anything left, bits of onion, crushed beans, wild greens gathered near the forest edge. Sometimes they added oats to make it thick, but today, oats were few, so they used ground peas instead, dried and then crushed into a coarse powder, almost like flour, but rougher. They mixed it with broth and let it simmer, slowly, whispering steam into the air. The smell wasn't rich, but it was deep. Father came in then, his boots muddy, his brow lined with sweat already, though the sun had barely climbed. He'd been turning the compost pile. Not waste, not to them, but a garden's promise. All the peelings, ashes, chicken droppings, it all became food for the food. A strange kind of circle that peasants knew better than anyone. He sat down, not heavily, just with relief. Mother handed him a bowl. It wasn't hot, but it was warm. That mattered more. He sipped it slowly, watching the steam like it might tell him what kind of day it would be. The children took smaller bowls, wooden, rounded by years of use. One had a crack near the rim, patched with wax. Another had initials carved into it. No one remembered whose. The pottage filled their mouths without rushing. It sat heavy in the belly, in a good way, the way that tells your bones, you'll have strength today. Then, it was time to bake the bread. The dough had risen, not like a castle, but like a hill. Gently, slowly. They didn't have ovens like the rich, no stone behemoths built into walls. Instead, they had a clay hearth, and for baking, a trick, a heavy iron pot with a lid. They placed coals below it, then the pot on top, then more coals above the lid. It baked from all sides, a small miracle. Every week, the bread hissed as it cooked. The crust turned from pale to brown, not golden, that was for stories, but brown like bark, strong, thick. It would last for days, if kept wrapped in cloth and hung where mice couldn't reach. While it baked, they prepared a simple cheese, clabber. It began with milk from the goat, left in a bowl overnight. Nature did the work. It soured, thickened, and separated. In the morning, they cut it into curds with a spoon, heated it gently, then strained it through cloth. What remained was soft, tart, fresh. They added nothing. No herbs today, no spices. Just the cheese, and a small sprinkle of ash on top, from the hearth, to keep flies away. Some might turn their nose at that, but in this hut, it was normal, beautiful even. Later that day, the oldest son went foraging with his sister. They followed a path barely visible, one only they knew, through nettles and bramble, to a place near the fallen oak. There, they found treasure, mushrooms, not the deadly kind. They had learned well. Their grandfather once ate the wrong sort and forgot his own name for a day and a night. But these were chanterelles, golden, trumpet-shaped, with a smell like apricots and earth. They collected them gently, whispering thanks to the soil with every pluck, not out loud, just in their hearts. Back home, the mushrooms were cleaned with damp cloth, never water, that made them soggy, then chopped and added to a bit of lard in a pan. The scent that filled the hut then, oh, it was enough to make you forget hunger. Just breathing it felt like eating. The mushrooms were served on slices of the new bread, still warm, still steaming, and then they paused. They didn't eat right away. They just sat there, holding the food, breathing it in. Because in a life where most meals were the same, grains, roots, maybe a bean or two, something different was a festival. Even if it was just mushrooms on bread, they chewed slowly, reverently, not because they were told to, but because the taste asked them to. Even the little one closed her eyes. And her lips curled into a smile as quiet as snowfall. That night, they drank milk, cold from the bucket. Not white, but pale yellow, with a soft sweetness from the grass, and a bit of herbal tea too, nettle and mint, steeped in hot water from the hearth. Not for taste, for health. The old woman in the next hut said it kept your blood warm and your dreams light. They believed her, so they drank it, in silence, beneath the hanging bundles of herbs that now danced gently in the warm air. The candle burned low, made of tallow, smoky, dripping slowly like time itself. They gathered around it, not speaking now, only watching, listening, to the creak of the beams, the distant hoot of an owl, the sound of a child breathing evenly as sleep took hold. The last thing Mother did before lying down was wrap the leftover bread in cloth, tie it tight, and hang it from the ceiling beam. Tomorrow, it would feed them again, maybe toasted over fire, maybe soaked in broth, maybe shared with someone who had less than them. They didn't plan it, but they trusted the bread to know what to become next, and so the fire fell to coals. The wind curled gently beneath the door, and in the darkness, filled with mushroom scent and barley memories, they slept, not because they were tired, but because everything had been enough. The light outside didn't knock or shout. It came slowly, creeping like warm breath across the wooden floor. The fire was still sleeping, but not for long. Father moved first today, quietly, like a thought you almost forget, but then remember just in time. He placed a few dried twigs into the hearth and stirred the ashes until a spark blinked awake, then another, then a little more warmth, until the morning began, not with noise, but with the smell of smoke and the crackle of dry pine. Breakfast wasn't a feast, not like the nobles with their eggs, butter and meat stacked high. No, here, breakfast was careful. It used what had been saved and what the night hadn't stolen with its cold breath. On the table sat a small clay bowl. Inside, leftover pottage from yesterday, now thick and stiff, but that didn't matter. They added a little water, stirred it gently, and placed it near the fire to warm again. Food didn't get thrown away, not even a spoonful. Even the crumbs had a place, either in the belly or in the hen's coop. Speaking of crumbs, little Elsbeth, barely 6, had been taught a game. She would take the crusts of bread and crumble them into her tiny hand, walking outside just before the dew faded, and she would toss them in a circle around the pear tree, not for herself, but for the birds, sparrows, mostly, sometimes blackbirds, and sometimes, if she was lucky, a dove. They told her if a dove came, it meant good luck, a full harvest, or a visit from a kind traveler. She believed it. So each morning, she dropped the crumbs and whispered, "Let the dove find us today." Back inside, Mother was mixing oats with warm water, a kind of morning gruel, not sweet, but filling. If there was honey, and today there was, just a thumb-sized lump, it went into the pot. Honey was gold to them, not just for its taste, but for what it meant, that bees had visited their corner of the world, that flowers had bloomed, that time had passed sweetly, even just for a while. They poured the gruel into wooden bowls and handed them around. The children sat on the floor near the fire. The adults used the low bench. No one spoke much, just the sound of spoons scraping and breaths rising in warm puffs. The flavor was soft, almost nothing, but not nothing. A hint of oat, a sigh of honey, enough to start the day. Afterward, Mother opened a small cloth bundle near the window. Inside were herbs, dried, gathered months ago when the sun was still loud and the grass still danced. She picked through them with careful fingers, choosing a few sprigs of thyme, a twist of sage, and one bitter root they called rat's tooth. It had another name, but no one remembered it. These were not for cooking. These were for steeping. She tied them into a little cloth and hung it above the steam pot, not to flavor, but to clean the air, chase away the illness that had been creeping through the village. They believed the steam helped. Maybe it did. Maybe it just made them feel safer. That was enough. The sun now stood higher, slanting through the doorway, and the eldest son returned from the field with something wrapped in leaves. A turnip, round, dirty, ugly, but beautiful. They didn't see vegetables the way we do now. To them, each one was a prize, pulled from the belly of the earth like an offering. They cleaned it with cold water and a rag, peeled it, then sliced it thin. Some went into the pot with lentils, some were eaten raw with a bit of salt, and a few slices. Fried, yes, fried, not in oil. They didn't have such things, but in rendered lard, saved from the last time they'd been given a bit of pork bone from the reeve. It sizzled on the pan, filling the hut with a smell that was half-forgotten joy. They ate those slices quickly, hot, crisp, greasy, and then, the silence that follows good taste. That silence, it's the kind that wraps around your heart like a woolen blanket. Outside, the wind had picked up, not loud, just wandering. It carried the smell of damp leaves and distant chimney smoke. Mother took her basket and stepped out, not for food, but for kindling. Evening would be cold. They knew it already. As she walked the edge of the forest, she picked up small fallen branches, not the big ones. Those were too wet, but the tiny ones, dry, ready. She also picked sorrel, a green so sharp and tangy that just chewing a bit made your face wrinkle, in the best way. They would chop it into tonight's pottage. Ah, pottage again. Yes, it returned every night, like an old story told just a little differently. Tonight, it would have lentils, turnip slices, and sorrel. Maybe, just maybe, a bit of barley, if the jar still had some left. As she returned home, father had taken a seat outside. He was mending the net. Not for fishing, not this season, but for catching birds, small ones, just sometimes. He wasn't proud of it, but he wasn't ashamed either. It was survival. The net was simple, loops of rough string, tied and knotted with care. It wouldn't catch much, maybe a pigeon, maybe a starling, but even one bird meant a richer broth. He worked slowly, his fingers stained and calloused, moving like they were remembering instead of learning. By late afternoon, the hearth was glowing again. The lentils had softened, the barley had been found. Not much, but enough. The sorrel was added last. It melted into the soup, leaving behind a scent like lemon and grass. They sliced the bread from yesterday, now firmer, but still good, and rubbed it lightly with a clove of wild garlic that had been hanging to dry. That scent, it clung to the air like a song no one could sing but everyone knew. Dinner was ready. Bowls were passed, the smallest ones first, then the others. No one rushed, no one talked much. They ate slowly, carefully. Even the broth was a gift. Elsbeth, who hated sorrel last year, now chewed it with a smile. The bread soaked up the soup. The wooden spoons clinked gently, and outside, the world grew darker, one tree shadow at a time. Soon, only the candle remained, and the warmth of the hearth, and the sound of breathing, not speech, not plans, just breathing, together. As the last spoon was set down, and the bowls stacked, and the fire sighed beneath the kettle, they knew what tomorrow would bring. More oats, more soup, more bread. But somehow, that thought was not boring. It was comforting, like walking the same path again and again, and noticing something new each time. The wind pressed gently on the door. Elsbeth had left crumbs again, but no dove had come today. She didn't mind. There was always tomorrow, and maybe the dove was already here. In the warmth, in the bread, in the silence. The coals in the hearth were almost silent now. Not cold, no, just resting, like the rest of the world seemed to do after supper. There was something about that hour after dinner, that soft, heavy pause before sleep. A kind of hush would float through the cottage, as though even the wind outside knew it had said enough for one day. The bowls had been washed with cold well water, not because it was pleasant. No one enjoyed dipping their hands into that chill, but because it was the only way. Warm water was a luxury saved for sore joints or special cloth. They used a strip of old linen as a drying rag. It smelled faintly of wood ash and thyme. Tonight the little ones had gone to bed earlier than usual. Their heads, heavy with warm soup and worn from chasing chickens, dropped quickly onto straw pillows. The adults sat quietly now, just for a moment, not speaking, just sitting, looking at the fire, listening to its breath. No one ever said it aloud, but that moment after supper was when the family truly felt like a family. It was the bread, they always said. It brought people together, and oh, the bread, we should talk about it more. Because for medieval peasants, bread wasn't just food, it was almost everything. They didn't bake it every day. It took time, and fire, and flour, which wasn't always plentiful. Usually, it was baked every 2 or 3 days, depending on the season, and whether they had grain enough to mill. The flour. It wasn't like ours today. Modern flour is soft, clean, almost white. Theirs, it was rough, gritty, a bit grey from the bran and husk left inside. Sometimes even with specks of small pebbles if the millstones were old. The flour was made from rye, barley, or sometimes maslin, a mix of rye and wheat. Wheat was too expensive for most peasants to use on its own. Rye bread was more common, darker, heavier, with a sour edge that came from the natural fermenting process. They didn't use yeast in tidy packets like we do. Instead, they made their own leaven, from flour and water left to sit, bubble, and wake up. Sourdough, not fancy back then, just the only way. The starter had been kept alive by the mother for over a year now. She guarded it like a pet, fed it, stirred it, whispered to it, because if that starter died, well, then the bread died too. So when she needed dough, it was with reverence, with purpose. She didn't have a proper table. She used the flattest board she could find, sprinkled with flour, pressed the dough with the heel of her hand, folding it over and over again. There were no clocks to tell time, but the dough knew. You could feel it in its skin, when it relaxed, when it puffed. Then came the shaping. Small round loaves, sometimes oval, nothing uniform, just hand-formed bundles of future joy. And the oven. Not every home had one. In fact, very few did. Most peasants shared a communal oven in the village, a large dome-shaped structure, usually made of stone or clay, fired once a week. Each family would bring their loaves, marked with a unique stamp or small cut on the top, so they could be recognized when pulled out. The walk to the oven was a ritual in itself. Children carried the baskets. Women carried the paddle boards. The air filled with flour dust and anticipation. The oven master, usually an elder or the Reeves-appointed man, would tend the fire, rake the coals, and slide the loaves deep into the glowing chamber. They would sit nearby, telling stories, trading herbs, waiting for the golden crusts to form. When the bread came out, it was too hot to touch, and far too good to wait. Sometimes, they broke one open on the walk home, steam rising like a ghost of the grains inside. The rest were wrapped and stored, sometimes in cloth, sometimes in baskets lined with dried lavender, to keep the insects away. That's the bread they had tonight. 2 days old, still soft in the middle, crusted at the edge. They dipped it in pottage, yes, but they also ate it plain. They even had a tradition. This is curious. Every time someone took the last slice of a loaf, they'd press the bottom of the bread to their forehead first, murmuring, "May the next be as warm." Was it a blessing? Maybe. Or maybe just habit. But it was beautiful. Now, as the last embers whispered their way into ash, the father brought out something special from beneath the bed frame. A jar, small, covered in wax cloth. Inside, dried apples, slices of them, shriveled, sweet. A few were placed on a wooden plate, chewed slowly, a dessert of sorts. These apples had been picked months ago, thin slices strung on cord and dried near the roof beam, where smoke would rise and curl around them. Not fancy, not even juicy, but they tasted of sunlight, of autumn, of the last warmth before winter. The children, if they had stayed awake, would have asked for more, but the father only handed out 4 pieces tonight, not from stinginess, but because he knew how to make things last, even sweetness, even apples, even time. At the back of the room, a tiny jar sat on the shelf. It held something even more rare, salted fish skin. A fisherman cousin had left it behind after a short visit during Lent. It wasn't good by today's standards. A little tough, a little too salty, but it was treasure. They would boil it next week with leeks to flavor a thin stew. For now, it sat, wrapped in dreams of what could be. Funny, isn't it? They saw value in scraps we'd throw away. But that's the thing about living close to the edge. Every edge is a door if you know how to open it. And peasants, those humble, quiet keepers of fields and flame, they always knew. They knew how to stretch flour and fire and time, how to make dinner out of dirt and prayer, and how to let a single apple slice carry the memory of a whole orchard. The night deepened. Not quickly, but like ink dropped into warm water, swirling and spreading. One by one, they crawled onto their mats. The fire finally exhaled its last, and the bread scent lingered just a little longer.
It's quiet now.
The kind of quiet that feels thick, like the night itself has weight. But the silence isn't empty, it's full of things. The tiny crackle of a dying coal, the shuffle of linen as someone shifts in sleep, the low groan of a roof beam adjusting to the cool. And just before true sleep takes them, the mother remembers something. She sits up slowly, careful not to wake the baby beside her, and reaches under the straw mat. There, wrapped in a piece of old wool, is a bundle of dried nettles.
Not something most would expect to keep so carefully, but to her, it's worth more than coin. You see, nettles weren't just weeds to medieval peasants, they were nourishment.
When the hunger months came, that stretch of late winter where stored grains thinned and gardens still slept, nettles were among the first greens to push through frost. She would boil them gently, the sting vanished with heat, and what remained was earthy, rich, almost like spinach. Tonight, she's not cooking them, just holding them, just remembering the taste, the comfort they brought when little else did. Sometimes, remembering was enough. As morning neared, that soft grey hour when night sighs into day, someone stirred near the hearth. It was the eldest son. He was only 13, but in peasant years, that was grown enough. His task, to tend the fire, to bring water, and to start the meal that followed dinner, the next day's breakfast. But this wasn't some grand meal. No fried eggs or sausage. No, for peasants, breakfast was simple, gentle, functional, usually just a bowl of leftover pottage, warmed slightly over coals. Sometimes, they would mash cold barley or oats with a bit of ale to soften it, creating a sort of cold mush. But if the stars were kind, and they had saved enough crumbs, they could make panada. Panada was the closest thing peasants had to comfort food. It was a kind of soup, made from water, salt, and torn bits of stale bread, simmered until soft, then thickened just enough to coat a spoon. If there was leftover milk from the goat, that went in too, just a trickle. And maybe, if they were very lucky, a few wild herbs found in the nearby meadow, ground ivy, sorrel, chickweed, things most would walk past without a glance. But the peasants knew. They always knew. The boy lit the smallest kindling. Just twigs, dry grass, not wood, that was for colder nights. As the panada bubbled faintly in the pot, he stared out through the tiny window. There was no glass, of course, just a cloth, pulled back now. Mist was curling across the fields. The morning smelled like wet stone and soil. It was going to be a good day, not easy, never easy, but good. The mother stirred next. She didn't speak, just smiled at the bubbling sound. She had heard it in her sleep, knew it before her eyes even opened. She rose and gently added a pinch of something. What was it? Ah, a tiny bit of mustard seed, saved from the last market day. It would give the panada a little warmth, a little spirit, and for a peasant, that little bit of flavor meant the difference between surviving and living. They didn't eat for pleasure, but they took pleasure in eating, even the simple things, especially the simple things. Later that morning, once the light settled into the thatched roof and the chickens announced themselves in messy squawks, the family gathered again. They didn't sit at a table, they sat in a circle, on stools, on mats, on whatever space was free. The bowl of panada was passed, one by one, no spoons for each, just shared, turned, wiped. No one spoke for a while. They were too busy, being grateful. Gratitude didn't need words. And then, this part is lovely. The youngest girl, about 5 winters old, brought out a surprise, a tiny honeycomb, found near the hedge weeks ago, tucked away in a basket since. She had waited for the right time. Today felt right. The honey wasn't much, just a few golden drips. But oh, the way it shimmered in the bowl, like light itself. She shared it, of course, dipped her finger in, let her brother taste, and for one moment, that cold barley mush became gold. They didn't need feasts. They didn't dream of castles or feasting halls. They just needed a drop of honey on a grey morning. That was enough. After breakfast, the house emptied slowly. The children ran to gather eggs. The father went to mend a fence, and the mother, she sat, just for a moment, beside the hearth, still holding the nettles, still thinking about dinner, because dinner wasn't just about eating. It was the center of their rhythm, the shape of their day. And so she planned. Would she use the last of the beans, or save them? Would the man at the mill trade flour for eggs again? Would the herb woman down the path have more marjoram? And if it didn't rain, perhaps she'd pick more ground elder for the stew. Even in rest, the mind kept cooking. That was the peasant way. Dinner was never far from thought, even when breakfast had just ended, even when hunger had not yet returned. It lived in their bones, and in the nettles, and in the quiet. The day had settled into its middle, not quite warm, not yet cold. A soft kind of light slipped through the clouds, like water through linen. The sound of hooves in the distance, a cart rolling over stones, maybe the miller heading back from the stream, or perhaps someone bringing fresh straw from the common field. The mother looked out, her hands covered in flour once again. She was thinking about something, about onions. You see, onions were important. They weren't just a flavor, they were medicine too. Warm, dry, lasting long after the harvest. She kept them hanging near the rafters, braided together by their stems, just above the hearth, where the smoke curled up and dried them slowly over the months. Some were small and sharp, others sweeter, thicker. She took one down now, peeled back the papery skin. The smell filled the cottage, sharp at first, but then earthy, almost sweet. She'd use it tonight in the pot. Not too much. They didn't want to cry, but just enough to bring the stew to life. Today, they would have leek and onion pottage. No meat. Not today. But that was fine. They had herbs, and barley, and thyme. Thyme was the most important spice of all. Outside, the eldest daughter was kneeling in the dirt. She wasn't planting, not yet, just pulling back the weeds near the garden's edge. She paused and reached toward a tiny patch of green. Ah, good King Henry, a curious name for a common leaf, one the peasants loved. It grew without fuss, tasted mild, almost buttery when boiled with oats or mixed with goat's milk. She picked a few, enough to stir into the evening meal, washed them at the well, and brought them inside like treasure. There was always pride in finding the right thing at the right time. Not pride like we think of today, a quieter kind, the kind that comes from feeding people with what your hands can hold. The stew began just after the bell at midday. They didn't have clocks, they followed the sun, the rhythm of the animals, the shadow lines on the cottage wall. She began with water, always, not boiling, just warm. Then came a fistful of barley, some onions, chopped unevenly, a leek, sliced long. Then she added a small handful of salt. Salt wasn't easy to come by. It had to be bought or traded for, sometimes brought in from the coast or from salt springs far away, kept in a little pouch, used carefully, just a pinch tonight, enough to lift the flavor. And in went the greens, the good King Henry, some chickweed, a few leaves of bittercress, stirred slowly with a wooden spoon worn smooth from use, the kind of spoon that carried memory in its handle. She let it simmer. While it did, she pressed flat little barley cakes onto a hot stone near the edge of the fire. No pan, no fat, just flour, and water, and heat. They cooked slow, crisp at the edge, soft in the middle. Not much to look at, but when dipped into the stew, they became something more. And then there was the secret. Not every night, of course, but tonight she had something special hidden away. A tiny sliver of lard, from the last pig slaughtered in the village. It had been kept cold in a clay jar buried beneath the floor, an old trick, using the earth as a natural cellar. She shaved off just a bit, paper thin, and dropped it into the stew. It hissed for a second. melted, disappeared, but the taste would stay. A kind of richness, warmth, that spread through the broth like a whisper. That little bit of fat meant the world, not just for the taste, but for the strength it gave. Calories were life, especially in winter, especially when the days ran long and the stomach ran empty. As the stew bubbled and thickened, the scent filled the home. The children came running back from the field. The smallest one held a pebble he swore looked like a rabbit. The others carried nothing, just dust and laughter. They sniffed the air, smiled. Dinner was soon, and not just food, but warmth and closeness, and quiet. The stew was ready just as the sun dipped low. It was ladled out gently, thick and steaming, served in the same wooden bowls they'd used for years, passed hand to hand. The barley cakes were torn and shared, dipped into the pot, softened. The little one dropped his piece, and cried until his brother gave him his own. No one scolded, just smiled, because that's how it was. You shared, not because you had extra, but because someone needed it more. They ate slowly, not from manners, from tiredness, and from knowing that each spoonful, each bite, had come from dirt, and thought, and care. And when the bowls were empty, and the pot was scraped clean, and the fire sighed a bit lower, they sat again, not talking, just sitting, the kind of full that didn't come from food alone. The fire had died down again, just coals now, glowing softly, breathing in the quiet, like everything else in the house. And above it, hanging from a nail in the wall, was something round, flat, dull in color, almost gray. A wheel of hard cheese, not the kind you'd see at noble tables. No, this was thick, dry, and cracked at the edges, more survival than luxury. But to the peasants, it was gold. Cheese like this didn't come from daily milkings. It came from planning, from saving. They made it when the goats gave more than they needed, pressed and salted it, aged it in cool, dark places, maybe the root cellar, or beneath the cottage floor, wrapped in cloth. Tonight, just before the last barley cake was eaten, the mother sliced a tiny piece, thin, like a ribbon, passed it first to the father, who nodded, then to the children, one by one, until only a sliver remained. She held it up to the firelight, and let it melt gently in her mouth, salty, sharp, slightly sour, a taste that reminded her of summer, of milk pails full to the brim, of green hills and buzzing flies. Food was memory, cheese, especially. The night stretched on. Outside, the stars began to wake. There was no lamp in the house, just the glow of the coals, and the silver of the moon slipping through the thatched holes above. The family curled into sleep, not all at once, slowly. The baby first, bundled near the hearth, then the little ones, arms flung across each other like puppies in straw. Then the mother, still thinking, still planning. What about tomorrow? Would the oats be enough? Could they stretch the last of the dried apples? Apples, that reminded her. She reached into a woven basket near the wall, and brought out a few tiny shriveled things, dried apple slices. They were tough now, wrinkled like old paper, but their smell, it still carried the sweetness of autumn. She turned them over in her palm. Tomorrow, she thought, I'll cook these into the morning mash, let them soften in warm water, add a bit of milk, maybe a few crushed fennel seeds for taste. Maybe. That would make a good start to the day. The next morning was colder. The hearth was still warm, but the chill had crept in. It was the kind of day that called for hearth bread. This wasn't the fluffy bread you might think of. It was flat, heavy, made from rye or barley flour, whatever was available, maybe mixed with some beans that had been ground into powder. Sometimes they added bran, what was left behind from the mill, and a pinch of dried nettle or sorrel for flavor. The mother mixed it quietly, in a wooden bowl that had seen more years than she could count. Just flour, water, a bit of salt, kneaded by hand until it became something dense, sticky, alive. She shaped it into rounds, pressed them flat, and placed them directly onto the warm stone slab near the coals. No oven, just fire and patience. She'd flip them once, let them puff ever so slightly, then leave them to rest. By the time the children awoke, the house smelled like bread and sleep and wood smoke, and outside, the sky was still thinking about rain. Later that afternoon, something rare happened. A peddler passed by. He didn't come often, maybe twice a season, but when he did, the village shifted. He brought news, goods, spices, salt, dried fish, iron needles, sometimes strange colored cloths from far places no one had ever seen. This time the mother traded 4 eggs and a worn scarf for a small packet of cumin. Just a pinch, just enough to last a few weeks. The smell hit her as soon as she opened it. Earthy, warm, a little sharp. It would go well with lentils, or mashed peas, something grounding. She wrapped it tight in cloth, tucked it into a small jar with a lid carved from wood, and hid it behind the water jugs. Not out of greed, out of care. Spices weren't just food, they were moments, saved for when the heart needed more than the belly. That night she made a lentil mash, boiled lentils in a clay pot, mashed gently with the back of a wooden spoon, salt, a splash of leftover broth, a dash of cumin from the new pouch. The children didn't know where the taste came from, just that it was warm, round, comforting. She didn't say anything either, just smiled. Sometimes, silence was part of the seasoning. As the house grew quiet again, with only the wind scratching gently at the door, the mother laid down. Beside her, the youngest turned and whispered, "What will we eat tomorrow?" And she whispered back, "Something warm, something good," because that's what mothers say, even when they don't know yet, even when all they have is a bit of flour, a little fire, and the promise of another morning. The moon was still resting when the rooster began to call, not loudly, just enough to stir the air inside the small cottage. The mother opened her eyes. Her bones ached a little today, maybe from the chill, maybe from the years, but she sat up, slow and steady, and reached for the shawl at her side, a soft woven cloth, patched at the corners, smelling faintly of smoke and straw. She wrapped it around her shoulders and stood. There was bread to make, again, and today she thought, maybe something sweet, not a rich kind of sweet, but the peasant kind. She reached into the jar near the hearth and pulled out a small lump of honeycomb, not much, just enough to stretch across a morning meal. You see, honey was precious. They didn't have sugar, that was for kings and merchants. But honey, that was the sweetness of the forest. If you were lucky, or brave, you might find a wild hive, hidden deep in a tree's hollow, buzzing with tiny golden workers. Some villages kept bees in straw scups, little dome-shaped homes made of twisted grass. They'd place them near wildflowers or along the edge of a field. But honey wasn't taken often, not unless they could spare it, and even then, it had to last. So this little piece, this tiny sun-colored treasure, it meant a lot. The mother melted it gently in warm water, stirred in oats, a bit of dried berry if she had any. The mash thickened slowly, steam curling upward like breath. She ladled it into bowls, soft and slow, waking the house with the scent of comfort. No one spoke, they just ate, quietly, thankfully. The taste of honey on a cold morning, it stayed with you for hours. Later that day, the sun broke through, just a little, long enough for the oldest son to take a basket into the woods, not far, just to the edge, where the trees began and the earth softened. He looked for mushrooms. Yes, mushrooms, but not just any. He had been taught by his grandfather, who had learned from someone before him, taught what was safe, what was good. He knew the smell of wild chanterelles, the golden trumpets that peeked up through moss. He looked for wood ears too, dark, wrinkled fungi that grew on old trees, and puffballs, round and white, soft as clouds when young. He brought back just a handful, enough to fry on the stone with lard, or boil with barley. The mother cleaned them slowly, inspecting each one. She trusted her son. But still, mushrooms could be dangerous. Even the helpful ones came with care. She decided on barley mushroom stew. Simple, filling. She began again with water, some dried thyme, a sliver of garlic from the last harvest. The mushrooms, sliced thin, a few bits of dried carrot from the string that hung above the window. They boiled gently. The scent filled the house once more. Not bold, but deep, a kind of earth smell, like damp soil and wood smoke. She added a splash of soured milk, thick, almost like yogurt. This made the broth creamy, tangy. You might think they'd throw out milk that had turned, but not then. Soured milk was part of the kitchen. It was used in baking, in porridges, even in stews like this. Not wasted, nothing was. Outside, the day had warmed just a little, enough for the neighbors' children to run barefoot through the wet grass, laughing, chasing a dog, or a chicken. Inside, the children sat near the hearth. The little one played with a bit of wood, shaped like a cow, carved by hand. The older girl helped grind peas with a stone, round and round, slow and steady. Peas were dried after harvest, stored in sacks, hard as stones until boiled. They could be mashed, mixed with herbs, made into thick green cakes, or turned into pea porridge. Today, they'd use them for tomorrow's meal. Preparation was always part of today, because tomorrow didn't wait. That night, after the stew was gone, after the last barley cake had been split and dipped, the mother reached for something soft, a cloth, wrapped tightly, hidden in a pot behind the water jugs. Inside it, something round, brown, shiny, a small piece of dried pear. It had been taken from a batch last harvest. The pears had been sliced thin, laid over racks above the fire, turned gently, dried slowly. They turned leathery, almost like candy. Tonight, she gave one piece to each child, softened in warm water, then set in their bowls beside a crumble of cheese. They smiled. A treat, a rare one, not needed, but so welcome. Sometimes, sweetness wasn't in the food. It was in the moment, in the care, in the thought, in knowing someone saved something good, just for you. And outside, the sky turned dark again, a kind of heavy dark, with stars barely showing. Rain would come soon. You could smell it, like damp wool, like old stone. Inside the cottage, the fire burned low, bellies full, eyes heavy, and the wooden spoon rested once more, beside the empty pot. Tomorrow they'd make bean cakes, maybe, if the weather stayed warm, if the beans were soft enough, if there was lard left. But that was for later. Now was for rest. Now was for breathing, and dreaming, of honey, and mushrooms, and that one last slice of pear. The sound of rain tapping gently on the thatch was the first thing she heard. Then the creaking of old wood as the wind pushed at the door. It wasn't angry, just steady, a kind of rhythm that told the land to rest. The mother sat up, slowly, pulled her shawl tighter. The fire was barely embers now, glowing under the ash like sleeping eyes. She reached for the iron poker, stirred them softly, added a piece of dry bark and kindling. The flame woke up, stretching, yawning in golden light. Today they would need warmth and something that could simmer for hours. A stew again, yes, but different. She looked toward the clay jar on the shelf. Inside, broad beans. Ah, thick, starchy, a little bitter if not cooked long enough. But they filled the belly, and today she'd mashed them into a kind of cake, thick and chewy, fried gently on the stone. She poured a handful into the wooden bowl, let them soak, and thought about how much had changed, and how much stayed the same. You know, people forget how precious salt was, not just for flavor, for preservation. Without salt, meat spoiled fast, fish turned foul, but with salt, food could last through winter. In this home they had a little. It came from a trade, dried herbs for a pouch of coarse grey crystals, and today, the mother would use it carefully, just a pinch into the beans, just enough to pull out the flavor, not enough to waste. Salt wasn't sprinkled, it was respected. Later that morning, as the rain fell a little heavier, the oldest girl came in with dandelion leaves, wet, muddy at the tips, but fresh and green. People think of dandelions as weeds, but back then, they were food. The leaves were bitter, yes, but boiled gently, with garlic, if you had it. They became soft, clean. Sometimes they were added to soups, sometimes stewed with onions or leeks. Today, she'd chop them fine and mix them into the bean mash just before it cooled. That way, their brightness stayed. She stirred slowly, hummed a tune from her childhood, and watched the mash bubble and blurp like a lazy thought. It smelled like care. As the afternoon grew darker, the house smelled of fried cakes, not sweet, but savory. Bean mash, dandelion, crushed garlic, salt, shaped into rough patties and pressed onto the hot stone. They hissed softly, sizzled, then quieted. She turned them carefully, using the edge of a wooden spoon. They browned, not golden, more like earth, and when they cooled slightly, she placed them on a bit of cloth beside the fire. They wouldn't be soft, not like bread, but they would fill. That was the word. Not excite, not delight, but fill. And in those times that was more than enough. As evening settled in, the wind turned colder. It found every gap in the wood, every crack in the wall, so she made something warm to drink. Not tea, not as we know it, but a herbal brew. She took dried mint leaves from a pouch, added wild chamomile, tiny yellow flowers picked weeks ago, and a few slivers of dried apple skin, curled and sweet. She dropped them into hot water, let it steep near the fire. The scent drifted through the cottage, calm, faintly sweet, a little grassy. She poured it into small cups. Each child held theirs with 2 hands, drinking slowly, blowing across the top. It wasn't just warmth, it was a moment, a stillness, a way to say, we are safe, we are here. And tonight, she would tell them a story, not a loud one, just a tale, of a baker from another village, who once made a carrot pudding so good, a bird stole it from the windowsill. The children giggled. The little one asked if the bird shared. Yes, the mother smiled. With the fox. Sometimes the best desserts are in the telling. Before sleep, she reached again for the stone jar. Inside, a bit of lard, enough for maybe 2 more meals. She sighed. Tomorrow they might have to stretch it, fry without, bake without. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, the bean cakes had warmed them, the herbal drink had softened them, the story had wrapped them. She tucked the little one under the wool, listened to the wind, and thought, maybe next week she'd trade again. Maybe the neighbor had honey, or onions, or flour that wasn't grey. Maybe, but for now, for this one night, everything they needed was already here. Inside this small room, inside the pot, the cup, the fire, inside the quiet. The air was colder this morning. You could feel it before even opening your eyes. Not sharp cold, not frost, but the kind that settles into your hands and doesn't leave till midday. The mother stirred beneath the wool, listening. No birds yet, just the distant creak of a tree bending in the wind. She sat up slowly. She had a thought. Today, maybe she would make onion broth. Not everyone liked the smell, not everyone had the patience, but for her, it was comfort. They had a few onions left, drying from the last trade. Not big ones, not the kind you'd see hanging in grand kitchens. These were small, twisted, a little dusty, but inside, still sweet, still golden. She peeled them carefully by the window light, saving the papery skins for the fire. Then she set a clay pot near the hearth, filled it with water, and began. She thought, as the onions softened and turned. What else could she add? The answer came quietly. Nettle. Yes, nettle. It stings when it's fresh, of course, but once boiled, it's gentle, nutty, almost like spinach. They grew wild behind the cottage. She'd picked some days ago and left it hanging to dry. She crushed it between her fingers and let it fall into the pot. The smell changed, from sharp to warm, like something remembering its roots. While the broth simmered, she looked around the small kitchen. There was an old turnip, still firm, some peas, dried and tucked in cloth, and a crust of bread from 2 days ago. Yes, the bread. She placed it over the fire, just to warm it. Hard bread softened slightly when heated, and when dipped into broth, it became something else entirely. The children would love that. Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves tumbled past the window, brown and curling. The older boy came in, shaking dirt from his shoes. He'd gone to check the traps. Sometimes, if luck was kind, they caught rabbit, but not today. Just tracks. Just the whisper of where something had been. Still, he smiled. Maybe tomorrow. The mother nodded. She understood. Even without meat, there was food. Just different kinds. And tonight, they'd use something special. Cheese whey. Now, cheese was rare for them. When they could spare milk, which wasn't often, they made fresh cheese, not the kind you slice, soft, tangy, more like a thick cream, and when it was strained, what was left behind was a cloudy liquid, whey. It was never thrown away. Whey was used in soups, in porridges, even in flatbreads. Today, she'd add it to the onion broth, after the nettle had cooked down, just for the richness. The broth would turn slightly milky, slightly sour. It might not sound lovely, but it was, especially with warm bread, especially with cold fingers. Later in the day, the girl helped her mother wash the old clay griddle. They planned something else, a kind of flatbread, using what was left of the barley flour. Barley was coarse, dark, not like wheat, but it worked. She mixed the flour with whey, a pinch of salt, a few crushed herbs from the hanging bundle, thyme, mostly, rolled it by hand, pressed it flat. The fire was ready, hot but steady. She laid the round onto the stone. It hissed, then stilled. The smell was deep. Wood, ash, bread, almost like the past was speaking through the smoke. They ate together near the window, steam rising from the bowls, bread broken between hands, no spoons, just fingers, just warmth. Onion and nettle, barley and whey. You won't find it in books, but it was real. It was real in their bellies, in their breath, in the silence that came when they chewed and forgot the day for just a moment. Then the little one asked, "Why do we never have apples?" The mother smiled. She explained, apples were for those with orchards. Some peasants had trees, a few here and there. Others, like them, sometimes traded. But apples didn't last forever, unless dried, or turned to cider. Sometimes, if lucky, they could get the leftover apple pomace, the mash left after cider making. That mash could be cooked into porridge, or baked into cakes with oats, not sweet, but sharp, and good. The girl nodded, thought about cider, thought about mash, thought about whether the trees dreamed in winter. That night, after everything had been cleaned, the mother set a pot aside. Tomorrow, she said, they would try pottage. Again, yes, but a new kind, with leeks if they could find them, maybe even dried mint, to freshen the taste. They would use pea flour too, a fine powder, ground from dried peas, hard to make, harder to stir, but thick, filling, the kind of meal that stays with you, like a story. And speaking of stories, the fire was low, the room was dim, and the mother's voice returned. Tonight's tale, a shepherd who lost his sheep, but found a cave, and inside, a pot of aged butter, left by travelers from the summer past. The butter never spoiled, because the cave was cool, and the shepherd used it to make a feast, for everyone. The children asked, "Did he eat it all?" "No," she said, "he shared it with the fox." "The same fox?" "Maybe," and they smiled, and they slept, and the rain whispered through the roof. Not a leak, just a hum, and the fire sighed. And the bowl from dinner still held warmth, and the spoon leaned against it, like it too was resting. The morning began without sun, just a thick grey sky, like wool stretched across the heavens. No wind, no birds, no sound. Even the fire seemed quiet. The mother sat still beside it, her hands wrapped around a clay cup. Not tea, just warm water, steeped with dried sage. It soothed her throat, made her feel awake without rushing. There was a kind of peace in drinking slowly, without flavor. Sometimes, plainness was a gift. Today, they needed to stretch what little they had. There was only a small bit of oatmeal left. Not the sweet kind you might think of now, but the kind that clung to the spoon. Thick and a little bitter, unless flavored with something. She had an idea. She reached for the celery root. It looked rough, like a stone wrapped in threads, but once peeled and boiled, soft, mellow, and full of earth. She would cook it down in the same pot with the oats. The starches would melt into one another, making the porridge thicker, a little more full. While it cooked, she crushed a handful of dried rose hips, not for sweetness, not really, but for sharpness, a kind of tang, like memory. She added them to the oats, and stirred slowly, letting their color stain the pale mixture just slightly. The little one wandered in, rubbing their eyes, sniffed. "Smells like winter," they said, and the mother smiled. Breakfast was small, a single bowl each, and a slice of hard cheese from the cloth. They ate with slow fingers, dipping the cheese into the oat root mixture, waiting for the warmth to return to their cheeks. Afterward, the children bundled themselves in cloaks, and went to gather wood sorrel. Yes, wood sorrel, tiny green leaves that folded in at night, a little sour, a little sweet. You could eat them raw, or steep them. They grew under trees, like little secrets, and when you tasted one, it was like chewing sunlight after rain. They came back with handfuls, dirt still clinging to the stems. The mother washed them gently, set them aside to dry. She might use them tonight. Later, a neighbor stopped by, carrying a jar of lard and 2 turnips. They'd heard the children laughing. Laughter was as good as currency. They asked if the family had anything to trade. The mother opened her cupboard. Inside, she had a small amount of fermented cabbage, something like an old cousin to what we know now as sauerkraut. Made with salt, stored in a cool place, it lasted weeks. She offered it, with kindness. The trade was fair. The lard would last longer than the cabbage, and the turnips, well, they would sing tonight. As the day wore on, the sky grew darker, but not with night, with snow, not heavy, not yet, but flakes, soft as whispers, falling through the wind. The fire was stoked, the clay pot cleaned. Tonight's dinner would be something special. First she peeled the turnips, Cut them into thick slices, set them in the pot with a bit of lard and a pinch of dried mustard seed. Let them sizzle, let them brown. The smell filled the cottage like an old memory, something sharp but good. When the turnips softened, she added water, a dash of vinegar and the sorrel from earlier. It wilted instantly, gave the broth a brightness, the kind that made your eyes flutter closed. She stirred slowly, tasting with her smallest spoon. It needed just one more thing. She took the crust of old bread, crumbled it finely, dropped it in, let it thicken the broth, turn it into a stew. It was simple, it was lovely, it was enough. They ate it near the fire, knees touching, bowls steaming. No one spoke, not because they were unhappy, but because some meals ask only for quiet. When the last drops were soaked with crust, the mother leaned back and sighed. She felt full, not just in her belly, but in her chest, like the whole room had been fed. After the meal, she took out a small bundle of clove and juniper, just a few pieces, wrapped in cloth. She dropped them into a small pot of water, set it near the edge of the fire, let it steam. The smell drifted through the air, sharp and warm, like a hug made of spice. They wouldn't drink it. It was for the air, for the house, a scent that cleaned, not just the nose, but the mind. She called it spice breath. And later that evening, as the snow thickened, the mother told them a story, not about foxes this time, but about a baker who had once made porridge bread so delicious, a king's horse had stolen it from his cart. The children laughed. How did the horse eat bread? With great joy, she said, and very little manners, and they laughed again. The snow tapped softly on the window, the fire crackled in reply, and the smell of clove drifted like a lullaby. That night, before sleep, she made one last thing, a warm cloth, soaked in hot water and mint. She laid it over her eyes for a moment, let it take the weight away. And as she rested, she thought, tomorrow there might be enough flour for dumplings, or a sweet made from roots and berries, or maybe just broth again. But tonight, they were warm, they were full, and the snow was still falling. The snow hadn't stopped, not fully, just slowed. Instead of falling fast, it drifted like flour shaken from an apron, slow, gentle, almost silent. You could see it swirling by the doorframe, like it was thinking about entering, then deciding not to. The children stayed under blankets longer than usual. There was no rush, not today. It was a day for quiet food, a day for bread, soaked in broth, and maybe, just maybe, a little dried plum from the jar hidden on the highest shelf. Now that was something. The mother sat on her stool and looked out at the white. She wasn't worried about food. They had little, but enough. And enough is more powerful than plenty, if you know how to use it. She decided to begin with a task that made her feel steady. She took down the stone mortar and slowly began to grind dried lentils into powder, not flour, not exactly, but a fine enough grit that it could be stirred into water, cooked slowly, and thickened. This would be the base for the day's thick stew. She added some dried wild garlic, pungent even now, and some crushed coriander seed, left over from summer markets. She let the mixture sit with warm water beside the fire, let it soften, let it become something more. The girl wandered in, still wrapped in wool. She was holding a carved spoon her father had made before he left for the mill job. She asked, "Can we use this one today?" And the mother nodded. Special meals needed special spoons. Later, the stew had thickened into a golden green mess, not pretty, but rich, like the inside of a seed. If seeds could dream of warmth. She tasted it carefully, nodded. It needed body, something soft, something to fill the corners of the stomach. So she took the last of the rye bread, soaked it in warm whey, until it softened, then folded it in. The bread disappeared into the stew like memory into sleep. And now, it was ready. They ladled the thick mixture into clay bowls, steam curled into the cold air like silk. The flavor was strange, but good. The garlic hit the nose, the coriander hit the tongue, and the soaked rye gave it weight. They didn't speak, just ate, slowly, letting it work through their bellies like a slow fire. After the bowls were clean, the mother took out a jar of tallow, just a little, hard as wax, saved from the last time they rendered fat. She melted some into a small pan and added a handful of oat grits, let it toast, let it sizzle, then stirred in water, a little salt, and a few shavings of apple peel she'd dried weeks ago. This would become something like a gruel, not quite pudding, not quite soup, somewhere in between. It was a strange comfort, but comfort, all the same. While it thickened, the boy stepped in with a surprise. He'd found chestnuts beneath the snow. Not many, just 4, but enough to roast. The mother cleaned them, sliced the tops gently, and laid them in the ash near the fire. The smell, oh, sweet, smoky, almost like sugar if you didn't know better. They cracked open after a while, and the insides were golden, soft. They split one between the 3 of them and saved the 4th. Always save the last one, for luck, or dreams, or later. Dinner that night was the toasted gruel. They sat closer than usual, their breath fogging the bowls as they ate. And as they sat, the mother shared something rare. She brought down a cloth bundle. Inside, a small brick of honeyed root cake, made months ago, meant for a celebration. She'd waited for the right day, and today, the snow had made everything still enough. The cake was simple, turnip, oat, and honey, pressed flat, baked once. It had hardened over time, but softened in the mouth. They each took a bite, closed their eyes, didn't speak. Sometimes flavor speaks louder than words. Afterward, she told a story about a shepherdess who once dropped her spoon in a boiling pot, only to find, when she reached in, that it had turned to copper. The children gasped. How? They asked. No one knows, the mother said. But ever since, her stew never spoiled, and her bowl never emptied. The girl asked, was it magic? The mother only smiled. Then the boy whispered, do you think our spoons might turn one day? Only if you drop them, she said, and they all laughed. Later that night, she placed a piece of old cloth on the window's edge, sprinkled it with a few lavender petals, and some crushed thyme. The scent would rise with the warmth of the house. She believed it kept bad dreams out, and warmth in. They lay down, close to one another, their hands tucked into sleeves, their stomachs full, their thoughts quiet. The snow still drifted, not loud, just enough, just right. The wind was quieter today. No sharp howls, no hard knocks against the shutters, just that soft kind of breeze, the kind that whispers through the chimney and makes the fire lean slightly to one side. That meant the weather was shifting again. Not warmth, not yet, but a kind of pause between storms, a breath held. The mother felt it too. She stirred the fire, slowly, letting the sparks rise and fall like fireflies that forgot their time. Then she opened the door, just a crack, to check the traps, and there it was, a small gift from the forest, a single wood pigeon, caught overnight. She brought it inside, cradled it like an egg, and said a quiet thank you to the air. They hadn't had meat in days, maybe weeks. This would change dinner. Yes, tonight would be a broth night. But first, there was breakfast to think of. They still had gruel from the day before, thick, starchy, almost like paste, the kind that clung to the bowl like it didn't want to leave. She warmed it with some crushed caraway and a hint of meadow mint she'd dried last autumn. The smell was unusual, like bread and snow and dreams. The children wrinkled their noses at first, but once the mint settled on their tongues, they smiled. It tasted like nothing else, and that was sometimes the best kind of taste. After breakfast, they cleaned the table with rough cloth. No soap, just ash and warm water. The ash helped scrub away grease and smells. Simple, effective, and strangely calming. The girl sang a little tune while wiping down the corners. A tune with no words, just a hum, soft and slow, like the wind in the reeds. Then it was time to clean the pigeon. The mother did it quietly, carefully. She removed the feathers with slow fingers, letting them fall into a basket for later. Nothing was wasted. The bones would go into the broth. The feathers would be used to stuff cloth. The meat, what little there was, would be stretched across the pot like silk. She roasted the small bird over the flame for just a moment, let it brown, let it speak, then dropped it into a clay pot with onion skins, a pinch of barley, and the last of the root peelings from 2 nights ago. She added salt, slowly, like it was magic, then water, not much, just enough to cover, and let it simmer, all day. No rush, no stirring, just warmth and waiting. While the broth cooked, the children made something special, not food, a doll, from rags, straw, and leftover wool. They called her Soot, because her dress was the color of chimney smoke. She sat on the windowsill and watched the stew bubble. When the mother saw, she smiled. Every house needs someone to watch the pot, she said, and they agreed. Soot would be their stew guardian, forever. As the sun tilted lower in the sky, the smell of the broth began to rise. It filled the cottage like a lullaby, soft, deep, warm. They took out the flatbread scraps from 2 days ago and warmed them on the hearthstone. Hard at first, but once heated, they softened like memories. They would dip them into the broth, let them soak, let them drink. Dinner was quiet, just slurps, smiles, sighs. No one mentioned the pigeon, not because they were sad, but because they were grateful, and sometimes gratitude is best shown in silence. After the meal, the mother brought out something old, a jar of spiced apple vinegar, made moons ago. She poured a thimbleful into warm water, let the steam rise. They sipped it slowly. It wasn't sweet, but it sparked the tongue, woke something in the chest, made the cold go away, even if just for a moment. The boy whispered, it tastes like biting wind, and they all laughed. A little. That night, they made a simple dessert, not the kind with sugar, but the kind with roasted barley, mashed with honey, and wrapped in cabbage leaf. The leaf was warmed first, then folded like paper. The treat was small, no bigger than a thumb. They each got one. It tasted nutty, sticky, and just a little green. But the honey, the honey made it sing. They chewed slowly, closed their eyes, imagined trees full of buzzing bees and warm stones, and for a moment, they were there. Later, as the fire dimmed and Soot the rag doll watched from her perch, the mother took a bit of soot from the edge of the hearth. She pressed it between her fingers, then drew a small spiral on the inside of each child's wrist. A simple mark, not for protection, just for warmth. She said, this is the path your food takes, from pot to belly to dream. And they believed her, because in their world, food and story were the same. They lay down, wrapped in shared blankets, breathed in the last scent of pigeon broth and spiced vinegar, and drifted, as if lifted. The wind had changed again. It wasn't louder, just clearer. It felt as though the sky had been scrubbed clean in the night. You could feel it even before you saw it. even before the window's frost had fully melted. The girl was the first to stir. She reached for her cloak and tiptoed toward the hearth, where a soft orange glow still curled beneath the ashes. Still warm. She smiled and placed a dry stick on the coals. The flame came back like it had only been napping. The cottage slowly warmed with it. Soon after, the boy rose and joined her. He held something wrapped in cloth. Inside, the heel of a barley loaf, the last one. Not fresh, not even soft, but not moldy either, and that made it breakfast. Their mother took the loaf and examined it thoughtfully. She turned it over in her hands like a stone, weighing not its weight but its possibilities. Then she reached for the small bag of hazelnut flour, a bit expensive when they bought it last autumn, but they hadn't used much. Today was a good day to finish it. She sliced the barley heel into cubes, toasted them in a dry pan until the smell turned from flat to nutty, and then sprinkled the flour on top, with a little salt and some warm water. It became something between a porridge and a crumble. Not sweet, not savory, just warm, and that was more than enough. They ate slowly, quietly, watching the smoke trail from the chimney into the pale morning sky. Later, after chores, the mother reached into a jar and pulled out a rare treasure, a piece of dried eel skin. It was thin, black, and curled like ribbon. She didn't explain what it was. She just dropped it into water with some sage, salt, and a slice of parsnip. The boy stared. "Can you eat that?" The mother shrugged. "If you do it right." She stirred it gently as it softened. After a time, it added flavor to the water. Deep, earthy, salty, just like the sea. They wouldn't eat the skin, just the broth. They called it sailor's tea, not because it was tea, but because it made you dream of ships and oceans. For the evening meal, she reached behind the salt pot and took out a cloth bundle. It held 3 black turnips, still dusty from the cellar. These were strong, stubborn vegetables, not the kind you eat raw. You had to coax the flavor from them. She peeled them slowly, watching her fingers, not rushing. She cut them into chunks and laid them in a pan, with old apple slices and a tiny bit of ale from the jar that had nearly gone flat. Then she set it near the coals and covered it with a clay lid. Let the fire work its magic. Long, low, patient. The scent changed slowly, from bitter to sharp to sweet. The apple and ale softened the turnip's bite. When it was done, they tasted it together. You wouldn't believe this could even be good. But it was, like warm earth and old memories. They dipped their bread in the juices and didn't speak for a long while. For dessert, yes, dessert, they made ash cakes. Not from ash, but in the ash. They took a bit of wheat dough, flattened it, and placed it beneath the coals, just the edges. Let it bake slowly in the heat. The outside charred a little, the inside steamed. They pulled them out, dusted off the black bits, and bit in. Crisp, soft, smoky. The flavor was strange, but cozy. The girl said, "Tastes like fire," and everyone nodded. They agreed. After dinner, the mother took down a small jar filled with dried juniper berries. She didn't cook them, she didn't chew them. She simply crushed a few between her fingers and dropped them into a bowl of warm water. The steam rose, sharp, cold, spicy. She held it under her nose and breathed deep. "Good for the chest," she whispered. The children copied her, breathing, holding, exhaling. A ritual of air, a recipe without eating. Sometimes that was enough. Before bed, they made a nighttime drink. Just warm water, crushed oats, and a spoonful of beet syrup, not sugar. Just thick, sweet juice made from boiled beets weeks ago. They had saved it in a pot lined with wax. Mixed with oat water, it tasted like sweet earth, like roots and dreams. They drank it slowly by the fire, feet tucked into wool. No one asked for more. Just enough. Always. Just enough. The boy closed his eyes before the bowl was empty, and the fire dimmed, slowly, softly, like it knew sleep was coming. The rain had stopped, but the earth was still soft, still breathing. You could smell it through the floorboards. That deep, muddy scent, the kind that wrapped around your toes even if your boots stayed dry. The mother stepped outside with a small woven basket, her cloak trailing behind her like smoke. The children stayed in. It was a foraging day, and not everyone needed to go. But she liked it, you know, that quiet walk into the edge of the woods, just past the barley fields, where the trees leaned close and whispered secrets if you knew how to listen. Her eyes scanned the ground, not for mushrooms. It was too early for those, but for something more humble. There they were, ground elder leaves, soft, green, clustered low and shy. Some people thought of them as weeds, but to her, they were soup. She plucked them slowly, careful not to bruise them, and tucked them gently into the basket. Next, she searched for nettles, tricky little things, sting your fingers if you grabbed them wrong, but if you picked them right, they tasted like spinach and spring rain. She wore a cloth glove to harvest just a few. No need for much, just enough. Back in the cottage, the children were grinding dried lentils, not red like today's kind, more brownish grey, like the inside of an old stone. They crushed them with a wooden pestle, turning hard shapes into flour. Their arms ached after a while, but they didn't complain. They liked the rhythm. Thump, twist, scrape, thump. The sound filled the room, calming, like rain, but inside. When the mother returned, her cloak smelled like wet bark. She set the basket down. The boy peeked in. He wrinkled his nose. Leaves? The mother nodded, smiling. Dinner. She boiled water with a slice of wild garlic root. Just one. They were precious. Then added the nettles, ground elder, and a handful of barley groats. It turned green, slow and deep. She added the lentil flour near the end, stirring until it thickened. It didn't look like much, but when she ladled it into the bowls, it smelled like forest after a storm. They blew on their spoons, sipped, and sighed. You wouldn't believe this could even be food, but it was, and it filled their bellies with warmth that crept all the way to their ears. After dinner, the mother brought out a strange treat, pickled crab apples, tiny, wrinkled, sour as a storm cloud, but just one could wake you up from a winter daze. She handed each child half. They puckered their faces, then giggled. The girl said, "It tickles my teeth." The boy said nothing, just grinned wide, juice dripping from his lip. As the sun began to fall, they turned to evening chores. The boy fetched water from the well, humming to himself. The girl swept dust into little piles and whispered to Soot, telling her where all the crumbs came from. Later, the mother gathered small pieces of oak bark and set them near the fire, not for burning, but for steeping. Yes, oak bark tea. Good for the mouth, the belly, the dreams. She let it brew while the fire crackled low. It wasn't tasty, but it tasted safe, old, like it remembered something you didn't know you'd forgotten. Before bed, they made one last thing, a night ball, not for eating, but for dreaming. It was a small pouch of rosemary, lavender, and crushed oats, tied up in cloth and placed under the pillow. The scent helped the mind settle, let the thoughts slow. The girl pressed her face to it and whispered, "Smells like Mama's hugs." And with that, the night took them. The cold had come back, but not with snow. This time, it was just stillness, like the air had forgotten how to move. Even the chickens outside made no sound. But inside the cottage, soft sounds filled the space. A crackling fire, the sound of wooden bowls being stacked, and the muffled hum of someone stirring a pot. It was the mother, again. No words yet this morning, just movement. She was boiling cabbage hearts, the very center bits, the pale curled ones, softest, sweetest. They had saved them all week, little pieces tucked away after every meal. It wasn't much, but, if you wait long enough, even scraps can become comfort. The pot steamed gently. With it she added some wild carrot tops, not the roots, just the greens. And then, just before covering the pot, she dropped in a single dried pear slice. The children saw. Their eyes widened. That pear had been saved since midsummer, dried in the sun, turned leathery, a treasure. They didn't ask why she used it now. They just understood. Because sometimes food isn't about eating. Sometimes it's about remembering warmth in the middle of a very quiet cold. They ate slowly, very slowly. Sweetness, green, and something hard to name. They just called it soft. Later, they prepared for visitors, not nobles, not merchants, just their uncle, old, smiling, limping, and he was bringing something rare, something they hadn't had in months. Cheese, not hard cheese, not blue cheese, just soft, sheep's cheese, pale and creamy. He arrived just after the sun slipped behind the hedge, holding a tiny wrapped bundle like it was glass. They opened it together, carefully. Inside was a folded cloth, warm from his coat, and inside that, there it was. It smelled like earth and milk, and something kind of like dreams. He tore off small pieces of barley bread, and spread the cheese across each bit with his thumb. No knife, just skin and patience. He gave one to each child. They bit in, closed their eyes, sighed. You wouldn't believe something so plain could make your heart feel full. That night, they made one last thing. They called it pottage snow. Not real snow, not even sweet. Just a soft mash made from mashed millet, warmed with water and stirred until smooth. Then, they folded in a little milk and crushed a few rosemary leaves into the mix. When they scooped it into the bowls, steam rose like fog. They ate it with spoons that had been smoothed by years of hands and mouths. Nothing fancy, just warm. That's all they needed. Afterward, they sat by the hearth with their uncle. He told stories from when he was a boy, like the time he ate roasted hazel leaves by mistake thinking they were cabbage, or the time he tried to make soup from tree moss. The children laughed quietly, not loud enough to wake the walls, but just enough to wake something soft inside. As the fire dimmed, the mother pulled a jar from under the table. Inside, fermented apple peels. They weren't for eating, not really. She dropped a few into a cup of water, stirred once, and passed it to her brother. He sipped, winced, then smiled. Taste like memories, he said. They all nodded, and then, the cottage slowly dimmed. The wind had softened, not gone, just slower now, like it was tired too. The thatch roof creaked a little as it settled into the evening. It always did that in early spring, when the frost loosened just enough to let things breathe. Inside, the day was quiet. Not because there was nothing to do, but because the mother had decided, tonight, they'd eat slow. No rush, no chores, just the kind of meal you make not for your belly, but for your soul. She pulled out the last stoneware jar from the back shelf. It was heavy. It had sat there for months, wrapped in old cloth, sealed with beeswax, kept away from cold and sunlight. The children watched. Even Soot seemed curious. She peeled away the cloth, then the wax, and lifted the lid. Inside, fermented turnip mash. It didn't smell good, not at first, but then the scent shifted, sour, earthy, a little sharp, and under all that, something like thyme. She scooped it into a pan and warmed it with water, barley flour, and a pinch of crushed mustard seeds. You wouldn't think that would work, but it did, like how old stones warm the fastest when the sun comes back. They called it spring stew, even though it had no greens, no meat, just the last of what winter gave. As it cooked, she started kneading oatcakes, not big ones, just flat, dry, round pieces, made with salt, oat flour, and a bit of wild lard, the kind of thing you could chew on for hours. The children shaped them slowly, pressing thumbprints into the middle. No reason, just because. The fire crackled, the pan hissed, and soon the table was ready. 3 bowls of spring stew, 4 oatcakes, a wooden cup of boiled milk, now lukewarm, and in the middle of the table, a small stone with lines scratched into it. It wasn't for eating, just for remembering. The father had carved it once, long ago, just little lines, like a wheel, or maybe a sun. They called it the meal stone. They always placed it on the table for the year's last winter stew. No one remembered why. They just did. After they ate, slowly, chewing, no talking, the mother stood and reached above the hearth. There, she found 2 dried rose hips in a pouch of old cloth. Tiny, wrinkled, bright as blood. She crushed one into a pot of hot water. It turned orange, then pink, then quiet. They each drank a mouthful. Tart, sweet, not really tasty, but alive. Then she gave the second one to the girl. To keep, she said. The girl nodded, closed her fingers around it like it was treasure. Night fell soft and warm. The uncle had left at dusk, so it was just the 3 of them now, and Sot curled near the fire, like a loaf of dark bread. The boy placed another log into the fire. The girl sat with the meal stone in her lap, tracing its lines with one finger. The mother hummed, something without words. They didn't say much, because there wasn't much to say. Later, when the fire was only soft coals and dreams were close, the mother whispered one last tale, a short one, of a time before bread, when people made cakes from crushed acorns. No sugar, no salt, just acorns and patience. The children didn't ask if it was true. They just closed their eyes and tried to imagine the taste. And then, the night held them gently. Just like that. If you are still awake, then I think you have to see the video from the 17th minute of the story, or play this side video. Maybe it can help you sleep better. Goodbye.